11 Strange Encounters with Aliens. Number 1. On October 29, 1973, Carlos A. Balvidares encountered 2 men and 1 woman who looked human-like in Leandro N. Alem, Buenos Aires, Argentina. Carlos, 43, was out with his 12-year-old son Manuel, heading to a field owned by Mr. Jorge Uricariet, where Carlos worked. In the afternoon he spotted 3 figures floating above a lagoon near a local mill, but the water was completely calm. Curious, he walked closer, about 80 meters away, and could make out 2 men and 1 woman. When Carlos called out to them, they turned and, without warning, vanished, only to suddenly reappear on the other side of the lagoon, about 300 meters away. Carlos was totally baffled by how they had crossed the lagoon so fast. He glanced at his watch and saw it was 5:20 p.m. The woman was around 1.60 to 1.65 meters tall, dressed head to toe in black with long black hair, and wearing white boots that flared out like a fan. The 2 men were a bit shorter than her and wore tight, flesh-colored outfits that looked like rubber, giving them a nearly naked appearance. They had blonde hair that also seemed rubbery. All 3 had very pale skin, broad foreheads, small noses, and they moved with their arms and legs close to their bodies. When Carlos saw them again, he noticed a bright light coming from a rectangular object around 5 to 6 meters wide and 2 to 3 meters tall, located about 20 meters from the power lines. The light in the center was about 40 centimeters across and shone brightly enough to blind Carlos and produce a lot of heat. Wanting to communicate with them, Carlos jumped on his horse and rode toward the lagoon, but as he got closer, the beings moved toward the object. He was only able to get within 150 meters before an invisible barrier stopped him. His horse wouldn't budge, which made Carlos dismount and sit by the lagoon to enjoy some mate while watching the strange trio. The beings moved around using odd little jumps, always keeping their arms tightly against their bodies and their legs together. The woman seemed to be in charge. She led the way, and whenever she raised an arm, one of the men would jump about 30 meters away, pause, and make a whistling sound that was almost like a distorted radio. Despite the wind, Carlos could hear it clearly. Eventually the 3 crouched down, tracing lines in the dirt and striking bizarre poses that left Carlos confused. He thought about riding around the pond, but just as he was about to move, the beings took off toward their UFO, changing colors to dark green and orange as they got close. At that moment, Carlos caught a whiff of sulfur and suddenly felt really drowsy. When he came to, both the beings and the object were gone. He had been watching them for about 30 minutes and the time was now 6:55 p.m. Strangely enough, after this encounter, the sow and some sheep that were in the enclosure refused to go back inside, no matter how hard Carlos tried to convince them. Later investigations found triangular footprints, about 4 to 5 inches long with 4 claw marks in front, near the spot where the UFO had been. The object had also left 4 triangular imprints, each 15 inches on a side, arranged in a square about 13 feet wide. After it all went down, the horse was acting skittish, and even started losing its hair. Source Albert Rosales, quoting Omar R. Demete, Onifi. Number 2. On June 23, 1976, in Aracanduva, Sao Paulo, Brazil, 18-year-old Paulo Coutinho was abducted. The beings that took him communicated telepathically, letting him know that on their planet there was no sex. Children were produced in a laboratory. That day, some ballpoint pens found in Paulo's pockets were found to be strongly radioactive. Around 7:30 p.m., a neighbor named Virginia spotted a strange light hovering close to the roof of the Coutinho house. Her daughter saw it too. Paulo had been hearing some mysterious whistling sounds throughout the day. After finishing class at 11:30 p.m., he walked his girlfriend home. While heading back, he noticed a light moving west in the sky and quickly realized it wasn't an airplane. Suddenly he felt a shudder and became completely paralyzed, unable to scream. The light came closer, descended, and then just went out. Then, a very short being appeared. Big head, large eyes, pointed ears, a small mouth, and an upturned nose like a pig's. It was bald with no eyebrows, and wore a tight bluish-gray jumpsuit with an emblem on it. The being then floated into the air. Paulo found himself lifted above the ground looking at a giant reddish cigar-shaped object, about 650 feet long. As he got closer, it changed to a metallic gray. Feeling dizzy, he passed through a horizontal door into the ship. Inside, he ended up lying on the floor in a dark gray circular room, where 3 other beings were staring at him. He managed to get onto his knees but felt paralyzed again. A telepathic message assured him they meant no harm. The beings turned and walked toward a wall which suddenly vanished. Compelled to follow, he continued on his knees into a bigger room with 6 more beings. Like the first group, this place had no furniture and no visible light source. They stopped, and he sat on the floor facing a side wall. As he thought about his girlfriend, friends, and parents, he saw their images appearing on the wall, like they were doing things in real time. Frustrated, he asked the beings what they wanted with him. They didn't respond verbally, but he understood telepathically that they wouldn't hurt him, and were curious about how life began in the universe. He noticed 3 different-looking beings and learned that they were females. When he asked about their reproduction, he was told that on their planet there was no sex. Children were produced in a lab, designed for specific roles in their society. When he asked to go back home, one of the beings touched a spot on the wall and glanced at one of the females. The wall then disappeared, revealing a red-lit corridor. Feeling compelled to follow, he walked across the room. A sort of bed emerged from the wall, and he found himself floating in the air before landing on the bed. One of the beings went over him with a hand, illuminating his body wherever it passed. After that, he started rising into the air again and felt dizzy as he was leaving the ship. Finally, he found himself lying down, hearing his parents and others talking but unable to respond. When he came to in the hospital, his whole body felt numb and tingly. Number 3. In June 2001, a 12-year-old named Joshua Saylor spotted a blue-skinned creature with a long neck in Fayetteville, North Carolina. He was living in a recreation center that had been turned into a home right next to Fort Bragg. Their place had a swimming pool surrounded by a 12-foot wall, connecting it to the back of the house. One night, while Joshua's family went to a school play starring his brother, he decided to stay home. Even though he wasn't supposed to swim alone, he jumped in the pool anyway. At some point, he needed to pee, and didn't want to walk through the house wet, so he went out the back door at the far side of the wall. While he was finishing up, he suddenly saw this really bright blue light, way brighter than a camera flash. Behind the house was an open field that went back about 30 feet before the woods started. When Joshua looked up, he saw a tall being standing just a few feet out from the woods, about 25 feet away from him. It had a long neck, a small lemon-shaped head, and was dressed in a white robe with a belt that had a triangular buckle. Its skin was blue, and it had a thin nose, a mouth, and big eyes that looked somewhat human. It was smiling at him. Then the being moved in closer, getting to about 20 feet away, and did this strange thing where it looked like it collapsed into a tiny point of light and shot away really fast, almost like when old TVs turn off. Surprisingly, Joshua didn't feel scared. He was more curious. He thought only a few minutes had passed, but when he got back to the pool area, he realized about 45 minutes had gone by. Just then, he saw his family's car coming into the driveway. Joshua excitedly tried to tell his mom, stepdad, and siblings about what he had seen, but they didn't believe him. They got frustrated with him for going on about it, and after a few weeks they even threatened to send him to a mental hospital for insisting on the whole crazy encounter. Source NeoRex at NeoRex4, X, citing witness to Albert Rosales. Number 4. On June 18, 1981, a surprising meeting took place at Gosplan, the USSR's planning ministry. A mix of ufologists, cosmonauts, and military officials gathered to discuss a strange encounter in space. The meeting was led by General Georgy Beregovoy, the head of the Soviet space program, alongside cosmonaut Vladimir Kovalyonok, who had recently spent 77 days in space on the Salyut 6 station. The big news was that the cosmonauts claimed Salyut 6 had made contact with an unknown spacecraft for about 4 days while they were up there. This mysterious craft orbited nearby, about 400 kilometers from Earth. Kovalyonok and his crewmate Viktor Savinik described the craft as being sphere-shaped and only half the size of their 16-meter-long station. Interestingly, this unidentified spacecraft had no solar panels or any typical features found on regular spaceships. The contact reportedly began on May 14, 1981, just before the cosmonauts were set to return home. During the meeting, everyone got to see a fascinating film made by the cosmonauts while they were in contact with the alien craft. The footage was taken through one of the Salyut 6's portholes, showing the unknown ship at times as close as 40 meters away. Kovalyanuk initially spotted the sphere about 1,000 meters away while they were working on experiments and called Savinik to have a look. They counted 24 windows on it, 8 around the equator and 8 on both hemispheres. The surface was smooth, with no panels or markings, and through the windows they could glimpse a brightly lit cockpit inside. The strange object stuck around for 24 hours, during which Kovalyanuk filmed a 45-minute encounter. Over that whole day, they watched the craft through 2 different portholes. Kovalyanuk managed to grab some initial footage but had no real explanation for the bizarre situation. He noticed ports on the unidentified ship, and for an entire day, it just hung there without any signs of life. When they woke up the next day, it was much closer, less than 100 meters away. The astronauts insisted that this ship moved around without any visible means of propulsion. It had a smooth, shiny surface and didn't seem to shift at all. They spotted the same 24 windows on 3 levels, and even saw 3 human-like figures peeking through small ports. The beings inside were wearing light helmets that partly covered their faces, but they could still see most of their features through transparent visors. They had long eyebrows and straight noses, but what really caught the astronauts' attention were their massive blue eyes, about twice the size of human eyes, that didn't show any emotion. Their expressions were completely still. As the day went on and the beings appeared friendly, Kovalyanuk asked Mission Control if they could try to communicate more directly. They got the green light for visual exchanges but were firmly told NYet when they asked about physical contact. Surprisingly, the cosmonauts felt pretty comfortable around the aliens, who moved their craft effortlessly. At one point, it got as close as 30 meters from Salyut 6, and they could see the beings moving, which, while looking human, also seemed stiff and mechanical. To connect better, the cosmonauts spread out a celestial map showing the solar system. Suddenly, one of the beings pulled out its own map, displaying the solar system on one side and some other stars on the other. My heart sank when one of the passengers in that vehicle pulled out his own map and showed it to us through the hatch, Kovalyanuk shared later. It had our solar system on one side and some other stars marked. Clearly they had super precise navigation maps. Kovalyanuk gave a thumbs up, and to his surprise the alien did the same without any hint of a smile. Right after that, the mysterious craft zipped away at incredible speed, but it returned for another orbit shortly afterward. The next day, the beings apparently stepped out of the spaceship and moved through space. They were about 2 meters tall and wore matching outfits that looked like diving suits with big bright visors. As they left their ship, they moved in strange ways, almost like they had invisible seats and walkways. The cosmonauts couldn't see any life support systems in their suits, even when the visitors got really close to the space station. Ground control didn't let the cosmonauts leave the Salyut, and when they asked for permission, they were turned down. Then, on the 4th day, the spaceship just disappeared. According to a report from Manchetti magazine, Kovalyanuk and Savinik had actually gotten used to these odd silent beings, who seemed to show no emotions. Even though this would have been a huge deal if it had been confirmed and shared with the world, the explosive story in Manchetti magazine didn't get much attention. The magazine itself didn't even make a big deal out of it afterward, which meant the whole thing slipped into the background, including whether anyone ever looked into it further. Number 5. On April 24, 1959, something unusual happened in Abbiate Guazzone, Varese, Italy. Bruno Facchini, a 40-year-old mechanic with a wife and young son, stepped outside his home after a thunderstorm to use the toilet and have a smoke. As he was out there, he noticed some strange flashing lights in a nearby field. At first, he thought it was just leftover storm effects, but then his curiosity kicked in. He figured it might be a downed power line since a high-voltage line ran through the village, so he decided to check it out. He walked toward the lights, but when he got close, they vanished. Just as he was about to head back, he spotted the lights again and moved closer. Facchini later described what he saw, a huge, dark shape that looked like a flattened ball, about 200 yards away next to a power pole. He guessed it was around 10 meters wide and 7 meters tall. In the middle of this object was a small ladder glowing with green light. Soon, he realized that the light was coming from a lamp held by a person who seemed to be welding. The figure was dressed in a diving suit and had a mask on. He told the press that next to the power line and a mulberry tree, there was this massive, round shape. A lit ladder came down from it, and when a door opened, he could peek inside. There was another ladder leading to an upper area, and he noticed bottles, gauges, and tubes along the walls. Getting more curious, he moved closer and spotted two other figures in the same gear, moving slowly around the craft. He guessed their heavy suits were making it hard for them to maneuver. The craft was lit up by the welding light, reflecting metallic glints everywhere. The sparks he had seen were coming from some pipes that one of the figures was working on, and through an open vent, he could see dials and cylinders inside. It felt oddly warm around the craft, and a buzzing noise filled the air like a giant beehive. All three figures were dressed in tight-fitting gray suits and helmets, with their faces hidden behind masks that had flexible breathing tubes. Facchini later said they looked about the same height as an average person, around 1.7 meters. At first he thought maybe an aircraft in trouble had landed, and these were just some American pilots fixing it up. But as he watched, he realized things weren't quite right. The beings were talking in a weird, guttural language and making strange gestures towards him, which felt like an invitation to come aboard. Panic set in as he realized they weren't human. He mentioned that he offered to help, but all he got back were those strange sounds he couldn't make sense of. The whole situation made him uneasy, and it felt like they were trying to lure him in. Then he heard this loud buzzing noise, like a generator, and the realization hit him that this wasn't just a regular plane, making him bolt away in fear. As he ran, he turned back to look, and one of the figures raised an object and pointed a light in his direction. He took off running again, but suddenly felt like he'd been cut in half by some kind of beam or jet of air, causing him to fall flat on the ground. After a while, I spotted four beings around this disc-shaped craft. Two of them were by the ladder, and a third one seemed to be trying to weld some tubes together. That's what had caught my eye with all the strange flashing. Thinking it was some sort of secret prototype test, I walked over and asked if they needed help. The beings started making weird gestures and making guttural noises like grr, grr. That's when the craft powered up, and I realized these weren't human beings at all. Panic set in, and I started running away. As I looked back, I saw one of them aiming something at me. I suddenly felt a force push me to the ground, and it felt like I was thrown a good distance. Later I described it as a strong shock with this burning sensation on my abdomen. I stayed on the ground just watching what was happening. Not long afterward, once they seemed done with their repairs, the American pilots hopped back into their craft. They closed a trap where light had been shining, then took off sideways with this heavy buzzing sound. I told Antonio Giudici they didn't seem to care about me anymore. I'm pretty sure they just wanted to scare me and had no plans to hurt me. I saw them wrapping up their work, taking down the ladder, and then the door shut. All the lights went out, but the buzzing continued. Suddenly it got louder, the craft sped away, and then it was gone. Later I told the press I got hit in the back with a light beam, and it pushed me so hard that I lost my balance and crashed to the ground, hitting my head on a stone. I felt hurt, scared, and dazed, lying there while they finished their welding. Then they all boarded the disc, it closed up, and left. I stayed on the ground for a bit, just staring at the sky. Everything was quiet again. Eventually I went back home, and of course I couldn't sleep well that night. The next day I went back to the site because I had lost my cigarette box when I fell. I noticed some traces on the ground, 4 circular depressions, each about a meter wide, laid out in a square about 6 meters on each side. The grass around them was burnt, and there were bits of melted metal scattered everywhere. The next morning, after a terrible night, I went back and found those 4 big circular marks, each a meter wide. The grass in them was burnt, and there were metal pieces all over the place, I said. I reported everything to the police at the Varese headquarters, but the investigation seemed pretty half-hearted. Some military technicians were allegedly involved, but that might have been exaggerated by the press. The police checked the site, saw the traces, and either I or the police collected the debris, which was sent to a metal research institute in Novara. They looked at the samples and concluded they were heat-resistant, anti-friction metals. Someone said they'd be ideal for space travel to withstand the heat when entering the Earth's atmosphere, but it's unclear who actually said that. A few days later, I felt like I had been hurt enough to see a doctor. The doctor found a black mark on my back where the beam hit me, and it grew to cover my entire back, causing pain for a whole month. I also had a few other standard injuries from being thrown to the ground. The following year, some of the debris was checked again by Renato Vesco from Genoa, one of the first private UFO investigators in Italy. He figured out that the samples were mostly bronze with a lot of tin and some traces of lead. I mentioned that I never really bounced back mentally. A lot of ufologists came to see me repeatedly, checking if my story matched what they read in their publications. It always did, without any changes. In 1981, Italian ufologist Ezio Bernardini sat down with me again. Nothing had changed in my story. I told him that when I saw the moon landings on TV, I was amazed that the astronauts' suits reminded me of the suits my visitors wore. Back in 1950, I called them diving suits, but now I saw them as space suits, or whatever you want to call them. A Navy officer mentioned our conversation. "You're really lucky. I'd have given a lot to see that technological marvel you saw." My reply, it was a bit sour. Lucky me if I had lucky. Number 6. In 1970, in Luanda, Angola, a guy named Mr. X, a Portuguese national, had an unbelievable experience with a UFO. He had been living in Angola for about 30 years and ran a business there. One night, while out hunting alone in a remote area, he suddenly felt something approaching from behind. When he turned around, he saw what he thought was a helicopter. Thinking it might have to make an emergency landing, he ran over to help. As he got closer, the object was so bright he had to shield his eyes. At first glance, it looked like it was about 5 meters wide, but he soon realized it was way bigger, around 50 meters. It was a round shape, with black smoke and fire coming out of one side. When it landed, it dropped a tripod landing gear. Even though he was confused, Mr. X wanted to help, so he walked closer. A metal ladder came down, and then 5 humanoid figures climbed out. They were wearing shiny blue suits that hurt his eyes and helmets made of a glass-like material with shiny metal on top. Each helmet had a tube going to the mouth and forehead, and some hoses connected to devices on their backs. They also had a bunch of rope-like gadgets hanging down. As he approached, one of them carried a strange instrument and made a peace sign like what native people use. This seemed to startle them. The leader then spoke quickly in a high-pitched language that Mr. X didn't understand. He said the beings looked pretty human. The leader turned to Mr. X and spoke in a melodic Spanish, saying they were from a planet called Teos, which Earth folks know as Jupiter. He scratched Mr. X's back, and the others did the same. Right then, Mr. X started feeling sedated, and his head began to spin, making it hard for him to speak. The leader kept chatting with him, curious about how they met someone like him. He claimed they were there to help humans and to gather important substances. Then, the leader invited Mr. X to check out their ship, and despite feeling scared, he climbed aboard. As soon as he stepped inside, he felt like an ant next to them. Inside, the ship was lit up by some mysterious light, and Mr. X could see tons of devices, control panels, monitors, and other high-tech gear. The leader told him their ship ran on some kind of special electricity. He was taken to a lab-like room with big maps on the walls where he spotted about 15 other men who looked like scientists. Then, he was guided to what they called the engineering hall, where he saw large, smoking turbines linked by cables and equipment that resembled transformers. After a while, Mr. X was shown off the ship, but not before the entities promised to come back. Following this strange experience, he went through another contact that he never talked about and ended up getting really sick. He later had to check into a hospital in Lisbon, but the doctors couldn't figure out what was wrong with him. He sadly passed away in 1973, and during the autopsy, they found that his organs had turned green. Mr. X only shared this incredible encounter with his family. Source: UFO Information, 1981 Number 1, citing Jose Garrido in UFO Nachrichten, Number 245, June 1977. Number 7, Strange Humanoid Encounter in Abruzzo, Italy, 1978. Location: San Vito Chiatino, Abruzzo, Italy. Date: December 23, 1978. Time: 8:30 p.m. The Bucco family was returning home after visiting relatives when they noticed a dazzling light following their vehicle. The light quickly overtook the car, causing it to stop abruptly without the driver applying the brakes. At that moment, a strange little man appeared, crossing the road in front of the vehicle with unusual bouncing jumps. Mr. Bucco initially thought he had hit the figure with the car. However, the figure quickly bounded away and vanished into a nearby pine grove. Francesco and Fiorentina Bucco reported seeing one humanoid, while the other 2 passengers in the vehicle claimed to have seen 2. The figures were described as wearing brown astronaut-like suits, large helmets with black square visors, and 5-fingered white gloves. They were approximately 1 meter tall and moved across the road in a peculiar, synchronized, robotic manner, floating 20 to 35 centimeters above the ground as if bouncing on an invisible cushion. Mr. Bucco also noticed that one of the humanoids had a green flashlight-like object wrapped over its shoulder. Source: Archivio Suff and Moreno Tambolini, alieni in Italia, 1945, 1995-50 anni di incontri ravvicinati. Number 8. In late August 1978, there were reports of strange humanoids in astronaut suits in Tortoreto, Teramo, and Abruzzo, Italy. Following a sighting in Chieti on August 28, a group of 4 young women from Sant'Egidio was driving home when 2 of them dozed off in the back seat. The 2 in the front noticed something weird, a glowing white sphere that quickly descended onto a nearby hill next to an abandoned colonial house. Curious about the strange sight, they pulled over and woke the others. As all 4 of them approached, they were hit by a blinding light that shifted from white to red to green, illuminating the area around the UFO. Between the flashes, they spotted a human-like figure close to the sphere, and they eventually saw 2 more figures, although they didn't actually see where these beings came from. The women described them as being in what looked like spacesuits, diving-style suits with visors, white gloves, and short boots. The 3 beings were about the same height as the women, around 1.8 to 1.9 meters tall. They moved with small hops or steps near the sphere, keeping their arms slightly away from their bodies and appearing to focus on the ground. They acted independently and seemed a bit distant from each other. For almost an hour, the UFO lit up the hill with a light that rotated from white to red to green, much like emergency vehicle lights. Eventually, the object took off, flashing brightly and seemingly leaving the 3 beings behind, who then disappeared from sight. This strange encounter didn't get reported until 18 years later, in 1996. Number 9. On the chilly morning of July 13, 1959, Margaret Moreland, who was 42 at the time, headed out to milk her cows at 5:30 a.m. It was just another day for her, as she was a hard-working woman balancing her dairy farm with a couple of other jobs. People in the area often turned to her for advice about their cows since she had some medical training as a nurse aide at the local Lister hospital. Her husband worked as a patrolman at the nearby Woodbourne Air Base, and sometimes she helped out there too. In her downtime, Margaret loved to read. Her daughter's husband Donald Parker once said, when she wasn't working, she was a great reader. She would read until 2 o'clock in the morning. That morning started off like any other. She switched on the lights and radio in the cowshed, grabbed her flashlight and walked across the paddock. But things took an unexpected turn. Halfway across she spotted a strange green glow peeking through the low clouds. It quickly turned into 2 bright lights that looked like big eyes, creating a weird light that even overpowered her flashlight. It was a horrid sort of color, she later recalled. Feeling uneasy, she thought, I shouldn't be here, and ran for the trees. Once she found cover among a line of pine trees, she looked up and saw something astonishing. A circular craft about 9 meters wide with a curved glass cockpit smoothly descending toward her. From the bottom of the craft, 2 shafts of green light were shining down, and it had small orange jets shooting out like spokes from its edge. The craft stopped in midair, hovering about 4.5 meters above the ground. The jets faded away, then reappeared, pointing sideways in 2 lines. The top row spun really fast in one direction, while the bottom row whirled the other way, leaving trails of orange flames behind. Despite the chilly weather, the air around her became warm, and she heard a low hum. While she was super scared, she also felt drawn in by the dazzling lights, an image that would stick with her for decades. It was just imprinted indelibly on my mind. I just took it in. I saw everything in those few minutes. Inside the cockpit, she spotted 2 figures in shiny silver suits and helmets. The suits looked like they were made of aluminum foil and fit snugly, almost like wetsuits. The 2 men were seated one behind the other with their backs to her. A flickering light was coming from below them, reflecting off their suits. Then, one of the figures stepped out of the craft and walked toward her. She could see his face through a small visor in his helmet. He was wearing a wide belt with a black disc, and his chest had a harness holding a small dial and a series of tubes leading up to his helmet. Notably, his left hand was missing, but it was wrapped in a dark sheath. The man shouted something at her in a language she didn't understand before heading back inside the craft. After a few moments, the jets blasted on again, and the craft tilted before shooting up into the sky at incredible speed. As it vanished behind the clouds, it made a soft, high-pitched whine. She was left standing in a wave of warm, peppery air, feeling relieved that the green lights had disappeared but also unsure of what to do next. Eventually she finished milking the cows but couldn't shake the feeling of confusion and fear. While I was milking, I kept wondering. I felt a bit shaken and puzzled, not quite knowing what to do about it. When she got back to the house, she woke her husband, Frederick. Fearing he'd laugh at her story, she was relieved when he took her seriously and asked if she had called the police. So, she dialed them up at 7 a.m. Woodbourne's commanding officer, Arthur Gainsford, came to the farm that day to talk to her. Frederick had already told him about his wife's experience. Gainsford found her to be calm and rational, and local police confirmed that she was someone they knew to be stable and reliable. Interestingly, Gainsford also found another witness, a local farmer named Roy Holdaway, who lived about 7 kilometers away. He had seen a bright light in the sky around 30 minutes before Margaret's encounter. This whole incident caught a lot of attention, and Margaret gave an extensive interview to but she left out the part about the one-handed man who had stepped out of the craft at that time. Note, after this sighting, the military launched an investigation. Number 10. In 1950, a 6-year-old girl in Liduvere, Viljandi, Estonia, spotted something strange in a clover field near her home. At first, she thought it was an airplane, but when she got closer she realized it was oval-shaped, silvery gray at both ends and,